What's going on, Wolfpack? It's TC and welcome to my studio tour for June 2022. Firstly, if you're new to the Wolfpack, a very warm welcome, and if you're not, welcome back. And if you find any of the information in this video useful, please hit the like button and consider subscribing with notifications. In this studio, I mainly make drum and bass and jungle music. It's fully capable of making tunes in the box and tunes using all hardware like they were made back in the day. First off, I'd like to talk about the centerpiece of the studio, the mixing console or twin mixing consoles that are linked. The mixer on the left-hand side is the Midas Venice 32, and the mixer on the right-hand side is the Midas Venice 24. The Venice F series was available in three sizes, the F16, the F24 and the F32, and there's also a rack mount version, the F16R. All of the F-Series consoles feature a built-in Firewire sound card. Previously, I was using the built-in Firewire capability, but now I've upgraded to 32 channels of Antelope conversion. More about that later on in the video. The concept behind having two desks is to have a mixdown side on the left, 32 channel console for summing tracks out of the box for that big console sound, and a hardware side on the right-hand console to make tunes using the hardware samplers and synths in the way they used to be used back in the day. The Midas F-Series consoles were originally designed for live use, either as front of house desks or as monitor desks, and this is why they've got the weird yellow fader at the end of the desk, which is actually a mono output. The Midas F-Series consoles feature 4 mix buses, 6 sends, a built-in test oscillator, a matrix output, and many routing options. The main reason why I decided to go for the Midas console was this awesome Midas XL3 EQ, which has sweepable top-end shelf, 2 parametric EQs with Q, which goes really tight, a low EQ sweepable shelf, and it gives you the same functionality as an SSL EQ. The only cons that I can think of for these desks is the slight fan noise from both desks. It's really not that bad. The serviceability of the desk is supposed to be a little bit of a challenge, and it's likely that I'll be left with 2 big boat anchors at some point as the capacitors start to die. Below the left-hand desk is a rack of various gear used mainly for the 32 channel desk. It's worth noting that I built the racking and the framing to house the 2 desks with my terrible carpentry skills. At the top of the left-hand rack is this classic Joe Meek SC 2.2 optical compressor. I bought this compressor off a guy called Steve China back when I was helping to build some recording studios on Stokes Croft in Bristol. Joe Meek was an English record producer, musician, sound engineer and songwriter who pioneered space age and experimental pop music. He also assisted in the development of recording practices like overdubbing, sampling and reverberation. Meek is considered one of the most influential sound engineers of all time, being one of the first to develop ideas such as recording studios as an instrument and becoming one of the first producers to be recognised for his own individual identity as an artist. Meek became fascinated with the idea of communicating with the dead. He would set up tape machines in graveyards and attempt to record voices from beyond the grave. In one instance, catching the meows of a cat he believed was speaking in human tones. This particular compressor has a sound all of its own that's very difficult to describe, including this dark mode button that I love. Next in the rack is this SSL-G bus compressor clone, which was made for me by the producer D Product from Full Cycle. The SSL stereo bus compressor is a sound you've heard on countless hit records over the past 30 years. I find particularly with this SSL-G bus compressor that it has a very subtle sound to it, and I like to use it on maybe a drum bus occasionally, It does have a little bit of noise underneath, so that's always something to think about. Below the SSLG bus compressor is this Neve 1290 preamp clone. The Neve preamp Class A design is considered one of the most revered preamp ever designed, and is certainly the most cloned and copied. Rupert Neve's easily tops the shortlist of all-time greatest audio production masterpieces. This Class A transistor mic line amp epitomizes the Neve essence, endearing it to engineers and producers worldwide. As you can see, I've got a lot of stickers on my Neve, and all of my equipment has a lot of labeling so that I don't put phantom power into my mics that shouldn't have phantom power. The voiceover that you're currently listening to is going through the Rupert Neve preamp and into the Antelope converters, so that should give you an idea of what this preamp actually sounds like. As with the SSLG bus compressor, this was also handmade for me by D Product from Full Cycle. I've bought a few pieces off him over the years, and there really is nothing like smashing a synth through this preamp, through the DIs, turn it up to 11, and it just sings. Next up, below the Neve preamp, is this pair of Focusrite channel strips. I had the top one for the longest time, spec'd it out with the digital option that I've literally never used. These Focusrite preamps have an optical compressor with tight and punch buttons release and a really cool tube sound emulation circuit. There's also a kind of a strange equalizer on there with fairly fixed bands, but it does have a really clean sound. I do like it. It's a little bit plastic though. The second unit was an impulsive music thrift store purchase. Moving on down the rack, I have this Antelope Orion 32 Plus DA/AD converter. This provides me with 32 ins and 32 outs of super high quality line level signal routed into the 32 channels of the Midas console on the left. This unit can also run some plugins on its internal FPGA processing that can be inserted on the recording chain with zero latency. I have to say that I'm super impressed with the Orion sound card. It is seriously amazing sounding, and I would definitely recommend it. Below the Orion, I've got this RME Fireface 800. I really love this unit. The main reason why I've decided to keep the RME is because of the analyzer that's built into the software that I rely on heavily when I'm mixing and mastering music. The RME is connected to the Antelope via the ADAT. Moving on down the rack, I have got a clone of an 1176 peak limiter. This compressor is the classic compressor for vocals, so I do sometimes insert it on the vocal chain going in. And below the 1176 is quite a new addition to the studio. I bought this bank of switches so that I could switch off different parts of the studio depending on what I was doing that day, mainly as like a power saving thing to save energy and do my bit for the planet. Over to the second rack now. This rack has the samplers and synth modules that are plugged into the Midas 24 on the right. At the very bottom of the rack is an old Windows Vista laptop I use to connect to the Akai S5000. The Akai S5000 is really the hub of the old school studio rack. I can make programs in Kontakt and using a piece of software called Chicken Systems Translator make them into Akai programs. I can then network into the Vista laptop and transfer them to the Akai via the USB option installed in the back of the unit. The Akai S5000 has 64 note polyphony, the onboard effects option. I have also added a SCSI to SD board inside of the unit, giving me 64 gigabytes of memory instead of a noisy SCSI 2GB hard drive. I can also screen share with the Vista laptop and see the front panel of the unit as if it was a plug-in on my Mac. The Akai S5000 really is an incredible unit with insane filters and everything you would expect in the pinnacle product from a sampler manufacturer like Akai. I also just bought an Akai S6000 and will be making more content in depth on both samplers as I use them more. Above the Akai is my Roland JV1080. The Roland JV1080 is a worldwide standard in high-powered two-space synthesizer modules. Used on more recordings than any other module in history, the JV1080 boasts a full range of acclaimed Roland sounds as well as 4 expansion slots. I have customized my JV with an OLED display. I've also made quite a lot of presets on this synth, and it definitely has a sound of its own.
Above the JV1080 is my ESI 4000 sampler. This was the first bit of pro audio gear that I ever owned, and the first tunes that I ever released I made pretty much all on the ESI 4000 with an Atari ST. The ESI 4000 features the classic Z-plane filters that are truly unique. I've been trying to convince a plugin dev to have a go at remaking the filter section with no joy. I've quite heavily modified this sampler with a new OLED display and another SCSI 2 SD card that lets me use multiple SD cards for storage, and also recently I've discovered that Chicken Systems Translator is able to mount the SD cards, and I can now create presets from my contact banks, which is a real game changer. Above the EMU is this Virus XL rack. It's basically an entire Virus C in the space of a one rack unit. The Virus is a digital synth that really sounds like an analog beast. It really defined the sound of D&B in the 90s tech tunes. With its multiple filters and wavetable synthesis, it features 32 voice polyphony, 4 oscillators per voice, 3 LFOs, an input to root audio, and loads more. It's also possible for me to make presets on the Virus Indigo keyboard with all the controls and knobs, and then import them into the Rack XL via the MIDI, giving me more possibilities in the old school studio. Above the Virus is the MIDI brain to all the gear below, the AMT8. The AMT8 by eMagic is an 8-in, 8-out MIDI box. It was the industry standard for many years, and as it is an eMagic product, it's still supported by the Mac operating system. It boasts eMagic's active MIDI transmission technology. This, in conjunction with eMagic's Logic sequencer, uses clever look-ahead buffering system to improve the timing of MIDI signals at the interface ports. If I could run 2 of these at the same time, I would definitely buy another one. At the top of the rack is this Lexicon MX200 reverb unit with that classic Lexicon reverb sound. It is the most budget reverb I could find at the time. I wanted a clean unit, but one where I could just quickly add some reverb to a sound on Sens 3 and 4 on a hardware desk. Even adding a tiny touch of bed reverb to a few sounds in the mix can really put the mix into a space, and that can really add something magical. In terms of monitoring, I use Adam P22A's midfield monitors in my studio. I've had these speakers for many years and I know them like the back of my hand. I find the ribbon tweeters a joy to listen to all day, and they really have the balance between detail and power that I need in a pair of monitors. I think that getting to know your monitors is more important than the quality of the speakers themselves. And speaking of quality, one of the things that has seriously changed the game for me in the studio is having decent AD conversion. I bought this ADI 2 Pro FSR and I cannot speak more highly of this piece of kit. My speakers are plugged directly into this box, and this box also takes the output from the desks and digitizes it, and having mastering grade converters in the studio has just changed my world. It is unbelievable. So finally, I've got this full DJ streaming setup on the other side of the studio. I use it to do set prep, streaming on TikTok, and most importantly, testing out my new tunes in the mix with other tunes. Thanks so much for watching this studio tour. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're a producer and you need new sounds and presets for Massive Vital, Serum and FM8, or samples mainly geared towards D&B, then please check out my site presetfood.com. Join the Wolfpack Discord, links in the description, and massive shouts to the Wolfpack, and I'll see you all in the next video.